Imagine, imagine you haven't left your bedroom in 10 years.
Right, a full decade. Just try to picture that.
Yeah, exactly.
Ah.
The world outside that single door has just become so overwhelmingly threatening that your nervous system is, well, it's permanently dialed to maximum alert.
You're in a constant state of fight or flight.
Exactly. And your brain has convinced you that stepping over that threshold is, I mean, it's literally equivalent to stepping off a cliff.
Yeah.
So you stay.
You build a routine, you figure out how to survive in this tiny, highly controlled environment.
Right. And then one Tuesday morning, that sanctuary is just violently breached. The door bursts open.
Without any warning at all.
None. Total strangers, imposing, authoritative, carrying this air of, implicit physical threat. They just invade your space.
It's terrifying.
It is. They pack your belongings. They physically herd you out of the house.
Yeah.
And the absolute worst part of all of this.
The betrayal.
Yes, the people who gave them the key, the people who actually paid them an exorbitant amount of money to drag you away, they are your own parents.
It's, it really is the ultimate betrayal. Because what you're describing, right, it isn't some hypothetical nightmare scenario.
No, it's happening right now.
Exactly. It is a very real, very profitable transaction that is taking place. It's essentially a systematic dismantling of safety, and it's being disguised and sold to these desperate families as, like, a rescue mission.
It's just wild to me because usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis or some kind of psychological intervention, there's an expectation of precision, right?
It's an engineering problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at it and says, there it is, it's broken.
Right. You cast it, you heal it, you move on.
We like things to be visible like that. We like them neatly categorized and quickly resolved with, a standard protocol.
We do. That visibility is really comforting. It offers this very clear, straight path from the problem to the solution.
But mental health doesn't really work like that, does it?
No, absolutely not. Especially when you step into the world of severe, decades-long social withdrawal. When we are dealing with profound neurodivergence or deeply entrenched, complex psychological trauma, that X-ray machine is utterly useless.
It just doesn't apply.
Right. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. There are no clean breaks to point to.
And when things are that murky, when the suffering is that prolonged and opaque, people become terrified, right?
Terrifyingly vulnerable, yes. They become vulnerable to anyone who just struts into the room claiming to hold a magic flashlight.
Wow, a magic flashlight. That's such a good way to put it. And in those muddy diagnostic waters, this entire industry of predators has built like a thriving ecosystem.
It really has.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in the Ginjo.
The current reality.
Exactly, the Ginjo. We were looking at the stark, alarming current reality in Japan of an industry that operates entirely within that desperation we just talked about. We're examining the Hikidashiya.
Which translates roughly to extraction contractors.
Right. And this is a phenomenon that forces us to look at, honestly, the darkest intersections of family dynamics, severe mental health crises, and, well, a rapidly aging population.
Not to mention the absolute ruthlessness of unregulated capitalism. The Genjo we are unpacking today isn't just a niche problem.
No, it's huge.
It really is a profound failure of how modern society handles isolation and vulnerability.
So to get into this, we're drawing our insights today from this fiercely hard-hitting piece of investigative journalism. It's titled, The Reality of Extraction Contractors Taking Hundreds of Thousands of Yen While Claiming to Save Children.
It's a brutal read.
It really is. It pulls absolutely no punches in exposing the mechanics of this deeply flawed predatory system. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Our mission for this deep dive is to dissect exactly how these vulnerable families are being systematically targeted. We're going to break down the deep-seated historical and cultural misunderstandings that are fueling this whole thing.
And ultimately, we need to explore the incredibly difficult, radically different path to actual healing that the author argues is our only real way forward.
Yes, exactly. So, where do we start?
Well, to frame this properly, I think we have to recognize that while the term Hikidashiya is Japanese and the specific cultural backdrop of post-war Japan is vital to understanding its origins, the core mechanics of this grift are universal.
You mean it could happen anywhere?
Absolutely. This is fundamentally about our collective societal desire for the illusion of a quick fix. especially when we are faced with impossibly complex human emotions.
We just want to buy a solution and make the pain stop.
Exactly. It's about what happens when people are pushed past the absolute limits of their psychological endurance and are offered a mirage of relief.
A mirage that costs, hundreds of thousands of yen and leaves the entire family structure permanently radioactive.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
So let's paint a detailed picture of the current situation on the ground. The Genju. Why does this industry even exist in the first place? And who possesses the specific kind of desperate capital to fund it?
Because you can't understand the predator without understanding the ecosystem of the prey, right?
Right, exactly. And the source introduces this demographic reality that is essentially the engine of this entire crisis. They call it the 80-50 problem.
Yes. The 80-50 problem is a staggering demographic and sociological crisis.
Break that down for us. What does 80-50 actually mean?
It refers to a very specific, highly volatile household structure. We're talking about 80-something-year-old parents who are still serving as the primary caregivers.
Wow, in their 80s.
Yes, in their 80s. And they are the sole financial providers and usually the only social connection for their 50-something-year-old children.
The children who are completely socially withdrawn.
Right, the Hikikomori. We are talking about individuals who may have retreated into their rooms in their early 20s and simply, well, they never emerged.
Let's really pause and think about the daily lived reality of that math for a second. That's 30 years of isolation.
30 years.
If you are that 80-year-old parent, you are dealing with your own inevitable physical decline, right? You are managing a fixed pension. You are likely watching your peer group pass away.
It's an incredibly fragile stage of life.
It is. And in a healthy dynamic, this is the stage of life where the parent might start leaning on the adult child for support. But instead,
you are the singular, incredibly fragile pillar holding up the literal survival of a 50-year-old adult.
the silence in that house must just be deafening.
It has to be. And the psychological state of these aging parents, it goes far beyond ordinary stress. It is a state of chronic, unending nervous system dysregulation.
They're just constantly on edge.
Constantly. The source describes their internal landscape as this highly combustible mix of intense fatigue, suffocating guilt over where they might have gone wrong in their parenting, and above all, sheer, unadulterated panic.
Panic, because time is running out.
Exactly. And that panic is the active ingredient the extraction industry relies upon. It is the fuel for the entire machine.
Because there's a literal, unavoidable ticking clock. Mortality isn't just some abstract concept when you're 85 years old.
No, it is a daily, visceral terror. An 80-year-old parent wakes up every single morning with the identical, agonizing question looping in their head.
What happens when I die?
Exactly. What happens to my child the day I don't wake up? Who will cook their meals? Will they be evicted? Will they quite literally starve to death alone in that bedroom?
Oh man, that is so heavy.
It's beyond heavy. That isn't just worry, right? That is an existential terror that completely overrides the executive function of the brain.
It shuts down your logic entirely.
Completely. When you are operating under that level of chronic fear, rational consumer logic completely evaporates.
And right into that void of rational thought, right into that existential terror steps what the author calls the worry business.
It's chillingly accurate terminology.
It really is. A business model predicated entirely on monetizing a parent's fear of their own death and their child's subsequent doom.
So let's look at the actual structure of this industry.
Yeah, let's get into how this actually works. Because if an organization is going to intervene in the life of a severely traumatized, socially withdrawn 50-year-old someone who has lived in a state of complex trauma for 3 decades, you would logically assume that the state requires rigorous licensing.
You'd hope so, at least.
Right. You'd expect a team of clinical psychologists or psychiatrists specializing in severe agoraphobia, or at least heavily vetted social workers.
Well, that assumption relies on the existence of a functional regulatory framework, which in this specific genja is entirely absent.
Wait, entirely absent.
Completely. The current reality is that there are 0 national qualifications required to open a support business or to label yourself an extraction specialist.
You're kidding.
I wish I was. The barrier to entry is virtually non-existent. Any individual with 0 clinical background, 0 understanding of trauma-informed care, and absolutely 0 accountability can legally print business cards today.
They just print a card and they're suddenly an expert.
Yep. They set up a reassuringly professional website and declare themselves an expert in rehabilitating Hikikomori.
That is insane. It's the equivalent of, Letting anyone just put on a white coat, walk into a hospital oncology ward, and start selling vials of colored water as a guaranteed cure for cancer.
And the hospital administration just watches them do it.
Exactly. It is a completely unregulated medical and psychological market operating totally out in the open.
The comparison to predatory alternative medicine is really apt. But honestly, the financial mechanics of the worry business function almost more like predatory payday loans.
Hey, what do you mean?
Well, they aren't just businesses that happen to exploit desperate people. Their entire profit model mathematically requires the consumer to be in a state of sheer panic.
Oh, I see. If the parents were calling, they would ask questions.
Exactly. And these contractors, they are master manipulators of language. They know they aren't selling a service to the 50-year-old individual in the bedroom.
Right, the 50-year-old isn't the one paying.
Right. They are selling a highly tailored emotional product to the exhausted 80-year-old parent.
The source actually highlights their specific marketing phrasing, and it's so devious. They use taglines like, leave it to us, we can change them, or we will take over from here.
So imagine carrying a crushing, terrifying boulder on your shoulders for 30 years. Your knees are buckling. You know you are about to collapse.
You're just totally spent.
Yeah. And a confident stranger walks up to you and says, leave it to us, we will take the boulder.
Wow. Yeah, you'd hand it over in a heartbeat.
It is an irresistible proposition. It targets that exhaustion perfectly. Because a parent in their 80s simply does not have the physical or emotional stamina for a nuanced 10-year psychological intervention.
They can't do family therapy for a decade. They might not live that long.
Exactly. They need the boulder gone today, and they will pay literally any price for that relief.
And we are talking about astronomical immediate payouts here. Desperate parents are emptying their retirement accounts, they're remortgaging their homes.
Liquidating whatever assets they have left.
Yeah, just to meet these exorbitant upfront fees. But let's dig into the economics of why this market naturally selects for the absolute worst actors. The source gives this brilliant breakdown of the brutal math distinguishing legitimate care from the grift.
The economics are really the key to understanding the Genjo here. So let's look at the legitimate side first.
Okay, the real support systems.
Right. Running a genuine, humane, 24-hour therapeutic care facility is incredibly resource-intensive.
Because you need actual professionals.
Yes, you need highly trained psychiatric professionals. You need a very low staff-to-patient ratio to ensure safety and to provide actual individualized trauma therapy.
And facilities that aren't basically prisons.
Exactly. You need facilities that are secure but comfortable, spaces designed to slowly regulate a deeply damaged nervous system.
And real psychological healing, especially after decades of isolation. It doesn't happen on a neat quarterly schedule. It takes years of, microscopic incremental progress.
Which means the overhead is massive.
So the margins must be terrible.
They are. For legitimate social care actors, the profit margins are agonizingly thin. They are constantly struggling for funding, relying on government grants, and really depending on the immense, often undercompensated dedication of their staff.
It's basically a labor of intense, grueling empathy.
It is. Now, contrast that with the bad actors in the worry business. How do they achieve these massive profit margins?
By inverting the entire model.
Precisely. They charge the exact same, if not higher, exorbitant upfront fees to the parents, but they completely hollow out the product on the back end.
They just eliminate the clinical overhead entirely.
Entirely. They hire unqualified, intimidating staff at minimum wage to act as muscle. They lease cheap, substandard facilities, essentially just warehousing human beings.
So there's no therapy happening at all.
Zero. There is zero therapeutic intervention, no psychiatric oversight, and absolutely no individualized care plans.
It's just a snatch and grab operation.
That's exactly what it is. Secure the massive upfront payment, physically remove the individual from the parent's home, and then contain them as cheaply as humanly possible.
It's chilling. It really is. But, observing this deeply broken current reality inevitably leads to a structural question. We have to look at the systemic failures that create this vacuum in the first place.
The vacuum that these predators fill.
Right, because why are these terrified 80-year-olds typing their panic into a search engine and calling a shady extraction website instead of, relying on government social services? Where is the public safety net in all this?
Well, the tragedy of the public safety net is that it is fundamentally incompatible with the urgency the parents feel.
How so?
Public social services are chronically underfunded and overwhelmed, sure, but they are also bound by strict bureaucratic and legal criteria. And more importantly, public health workers operate under a mandate that respects individual autonomy.
Oh, right. They can't just force someone.
Exactly. If a city social worker visits a home, knocks on the bedroom door, and the 50-year-old individual refuses to engage or refuses to leave, the social worker's hands are largely tied.
They can't kidnap them legally.
Right. They can offer resources to the parents, they can schedule follow-ups, but they absolutely cannot force a competent adult out of their home against their will.
Which makes sense. The state, rightly so, respects the individual's civil liberties and their right to refuse treatment.
It does. But to an 80-year-old parent who believes their child is going to literally die when they pass away, that respect for boundaries looks like a catastrophic failure of the system.
I see. They don't want a social worker who respects civil liberties at that point.
No, they want a tactical intervention. They want to guarantee that the problem will be physically removed from the house.
And the only entity willing to offer that impossible guarantee is the private, unregulated sector.
Because they are entirely unburdened by ethics or the law.
Okay, so that paints a terrifyingly clear picture of the economic and demographic reality. We have exhausted parents, a gaping hole in public services, and this thriving market of unregulated mercenaries.
A perfect storm.
But that brings us to this massive, glaring contradiction. If the reality of these extraction services is so predatory, and if the aftermath is as traumatizing as we've sort of hinted at, why do parents actually believe this forced removal is a valid, logical solution?
To answer that, we have to transition away from the economics and dig deep into the historical psychology of the culture.
Right, the cultural bedrock that makes this seem somehow acceptable. I think of it as the Showa-era hangover.
That is perhaps the most crucial piece of the puzzle here. You really cannot understand the Genjo without understanding the historical, socioeconomic conditioning that built it.
Because the way a society collectively defines a problem dictates how it tries to solve it.
Exactly. And for decades in Japan, the societal definition of severe social withdrawal has been catastrophically aggressively wrong.
The source spends a significant amount of time dissecting the Showa-era mentality. So for context for you listening, the Showa era spans from 1926 to 1989. But we're specifically looking at the post-WWII economic miracle part of it.
Right, the boom years.
Yeah, this was a period of frantic, intense national rebuilding. It was the era that birthed the fiercely dedicated corporate salaryman. It was a time of extreme collective effort, lifetime employment, and incredibly rigid social conformity.
Your worth to society was almost inextricably linked to your visible economic productivity.
Exactly. And in that hyper-industrialized, productivity-obsessed environment, there was absolutely no vocabulary for neurodivergence.
None. There was no societal bandwidth for complex trauma, crippling anxiety disorders, or major depression. The cultural narrative was entirely focused on resilience, endurance, and collective duty.
So when young people began to break under the immense pressure of those educational and corporate systems, when their nervous system simply shut down and they withdrew into their rooms, the culture just lacked the lens to see this as a psychological crisis.
Because if you acknowledge it as a systemic crisis, you have to question the system itself.
And you couldn't question the system. The system was creating an economic miracle. It was taboo to even criticize it.
So therefore, the blame had to be placed squarely on the individual's character.
The persistent, toxic myth that developed was that social withdrawal was simply a manifestation of profound laziness.
Right. It was categorized as a lack of willpower, like a selfish refusal to participate in the social contract.
It was viewed not as a mental health emergency, but as a deep moral failing.
And the diagnosis dictates the cure. If the societal diagnosis is laziness and selfishness, then the socially prescribed treatment is discipline.
And this gave rise to the enduring legacy of tough love as the default parenting strategy for these crises.
The Showa-era parenting manual, so to speak, suggested that the only way to correct this moral failing was through severe strictness.
Like, what did that actually look like?
Parents were advised to scold endlessly, to utilize harsh behavioral corrections, or even to resort to outright physical violence to basically shock the child out of their lethargy.
Just beat the laziness out of them.
Exactly. The prevailing logic was that you had to make the home environment so uncomfortable that the child would be forced out into the real world.
It's just an agonizingly tragic misunderstanding of human psychology. And what makes the source material so incredibly impactful here is that the author isn't just theorizing about this.
No, they lived it.
They did. They share their own deeply personal, visceral experience of having been a Hikikomori And they completely shatter this myth of the lazy shut-in, lounging around playing video games and enjoying an easy life.
The author's description of their internal state during that withdrawal is one of the most profound clinical insights in the piece.
What do they say it felt like?
They describe the experience not as relaxation or avoidance of hard work, but as a terrifying, paralyzing sensation of standing precariously on the boundary between life and death.
Let's really analyze that phrase for a second. The boundary between life and death. That is the language of severe trauma.
It absolutely is.
That is the language of a nervous system that has been pushed so far past its window of tolerance that it has collapsed into a complete freeze response.
Yes. In terms of polyvagal theory, this is known as the dorsal vagal state. The body perceives a threat so massive and inescapable that the active fight-or-flight response is useless.
So you just shut down.
So the system simply shuts down to conserve energy and survive. The individual feels completely detached, immobilized by terror. The outside world is perceived as a literally lethal threat.
And now layer that Showa-era response over that physiological reality. Imagine you were in that state of absolute paralyzing terror. Your nervous system is screaming that you are in mortal danger.
And the only feedback you receive from your parents, your teachers, and your society is, stop being so lazy, you're an embarrassment, get out of bed and try harder.
The cognitive dissonance is destructive. Because the environment lacks even a microscopic shred of empathy or understanding of their actual physiological state, the individual learns very quickly that they cannot safely send out an SOS.
Right, because it's attempting to articulate your terror just results in punishment, derision, or physical discipline. You stop attempting.
You retreat even further inwards, severing all remaining lines of communication just to protect yourself.
It becomes a self-sealing vault, a crisis that, with early, compassionate, trauma-informed intervention, might have been manageable, instead hardens into a decades-long entrenchment.
The isolation is prolonged indefinitely because the external environment is actively, aggressively hostile to the individual's internal reality.
Exactly.
But, I have to push back on this timeline a bit, because this is where my mind really struggles to reconcile the reality of 2026.
Okay, what's the hang-up?
I understand the history. I clearly see how the post-war Showa mindset created this terrible dynamic in the 1970s and 80s. But we are living in an era of unprecedented global mental health awareness now.
That's true, we are.
We have podcasts, documentaries, international campaigns constantly discussing complex trauma, neurodivergence, and the importance of therapy. It's in the cultural water supply.
It is everywhere.
So how is it possible that this archaic, tough love narrative, this profoundly ignorant idea that you can hire mercenaries to physically drag the lazy out of a person, is still a viable, highly profitable business model today? How has this specific demographic entirely missed the cultural software update?
It's a crucial question, and it highlights the friction between sweeping cultural progress and individual psychological rigidity. To understand why this persists, we have to look intimately at the specific consumers driving this market.
The 80-something parents.
Exactly. You have to remember where their foundational worldview was forged. Their core beliefs about parenting, duty, shame, and societal expectations were entirely solidified during that rigid Showa era.
Their operating system was programmed 50 years ago, and the source code just hasn't changed.
That's right. And asking someone in their 80s to suddenly dismantle their entire foundational belief system and embrace modern trauma-informed psychology, especially while they're operating in a state of sheer existential panic about their own mortality, is basically asking the impossible.
Under extreme stress, people don't adapt.
No. Under extreme chronic stress, human beings do not adapt to new, complex paradigms. They violently regress to their most deeply ingrained, familiar beliefs.
They default to what society definitively told them was correct when they were actively raising their children in the 1970s.
Furthermore, we cannot ignore the powerful elements of parental ego and profound societal shame at play here.
Shame is a huge factor.
It is. In a culture that historically valued conformity above all else, acknowledging that your child has a severe, debilitating mental health condition or is neurodivergent can feel, to an older generation, like accepting a permanent, indelible stain on the family lineage.
It feels like a public declaration of complete parental failure.
Exactly. Whereas framing it as a discipline issue or stubbornness, while frustrating, implies a level of control.
Right. It implies that with enough force, the problem can still be fixed.
It protects the parental ego by placing the locus of the problem on the child's behavioral choices rather than acknowledging a complex psychiatric reality.
And that false sense of control is exactly what the extraction contractors are selling. But the tragedy is that this represents a fundamental, catastrophic misdiagnosis of the core problem.
The parents are attempting to treat a severe psychological limit, a total nervous system shutdown, as a conscious behavioral discipline issue.
And when your diagnosis is that fundamentally flawed, you guarantee that the prescribed cure will not just fail, but will cause immense harm.
Yes.
It's literally treating a shattered spine with a motivational speech and a beating. If a patient comes in with a pulverized femur, screaming at them to stop being lazy and walk on it, isn't tough love, it is profound medical abuse.
But because the injury is psychological and invisible, the abuse is sanctioned.
Which brings us directly into the darkest, most visceral part of the Ginju we are exploring today. We've established the terrifying economic pressures and the outdated, shame-driven mindset that parents fall back on out of desperation.
The setup for the disaster.
Right. Now, we have to examine the horrifying reality of what actually transpires when they act on that desperation and sign the contract. We need to look closely at the mechanics of the extraction event itself.
This section of the source material is deeply distressing because it lays bare the clinical reality of an ambush.
How does it usually play out?
It outlines the typical chronological progression of these cases. As we discussed, the withdrawal often drags on for years, sometimes decades, and over that massive stretch of time, the volatile situation inside the home often degrades into a strange, stagnant kind of stabilization.
It is profoundly unhealthy, but it is a predictable routine.
Exactly. The individual is isolated in their room. The parents leave food trays in the hallway. There is no direct communication, but there is a silent, uneasy truce.
The battle lines are drawn and respected.
And from a neurological perspective, the nervous system of the withdrawn individual has completely adapted to this microscopic safe zone. Their entire capacity for survival, their ability to regulate their terror, is entirely predicated on the absolute predictability of that single room and that unchanging routine. The walls of that bedroom are the only things holding their fragile psychology together.
And then the ticking clock of mortality finally trips the wire for the aging parents. The panic overwhelms their endurance. They discover the slick website of a contractor, and they make the fateful, secret decision to hire a third party.
Yes.
So walk us through the anatomy of the extraction event as described in the piece. What actually happens?
The defining characteristic of the extraction is its suddenness and its absolute overwhelming finality. The withdrawn individual, who already perceives the external world as a lethal threat, is existing in their one solitary sanctuary.
And then?
Suddenly, without warning, the door opens. Total strangers enter the room. These contractors are often large, imposing figures, projecting an aura of undeniable authority.
And what do they say?
They deliver a message that is often phrased with sickening gentleness, but is backed by the undeniable implicit threat of physical force. They say, let's go together.
Let's go together. When you strip away the context, it almost sounds like an invitation from a friend.
But within the reality of that bedroom.
Right. It is an eviction notice from reality as they know it. It is the verbal equivalent of a gun to the head.
It is a complete, violent violation of the only boundary they had left, and the operation moves at lightning speed to prevent any resistance.
How fast are we talking?
The aftermath is immediate. The individual is physically ushered out of the home, placed in a vehicle, and transported to the contractor's facility on that exact same day. The physical extraction is complete in a matter of hours.
And what fundamentally has been resolved in those hours?
Clinically speaking, absolutely nothing. Zero.
None of the root causes.
None. The severe anxiety, the decades of complex trauma, the deeply dysfunctional family communication dynamics, the fundamental nervous system dysregulation, none of that has been addressed, let alone treated.
So what did they actually accomplish?
Instead of healing, the sheer shock of being ambushed, forcibly separated from their only safe space and removed from their parents, creates a profound, devastating layer of entirely new trauma.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly where the full horror of the Genju snaps into focus for me. I want to ask you, the listener, to deeply put yourself in the shoes of the Hikikomori for a moment.
It's a dark place to go, but necessary.
Yeah. You have spent your entire adult life feeling utterly, fundamentally unsafe in the world. The social anxiety is so crushing that the mere thought of crossing the threshold of your own front door induces a panic attack.
Your bedroom is your fortress.
Exactly. It is the only geographical location on the planet where your nervous system allows you to breathe somewhat normally.
It is their entire universe of safety.
And then, on a random morning, the walls of that fortress are breached. Strangers are standing in the center of your universe, ordering you to leave. And as the shock wears off, the devastating realization hits you.
Who let them in?
Yes. Who unlocked the front door? Who provided the floor plan of the house? Who paid these mercenaries an exorbitant sum of money to carry out this ambush? Your own parents.
The betrayal is absolute, cellular, and permanent.
It utterly, irreparably shatters any remaining microscopic shred of familial trust. I mean, if the people who brought you into the world, the people who are biologically and socially mandated to protect you, are the exact same people who secretly plotted with strangers to drag you away. How does a human mind ever recover from that?
It's incredibly hard to fathom.
How do you ever look at your mother or father again without seeing a threat?
The clinical reality is that in many of these cases, you don't. The relationship is permanently severed, and that exposes the devastating, tragic irony at the very heart of this entire transaction.
The parents think they're helping.
Right. The parents are driven by their own terror and a warped Showa-era sense of duty. They are draining their life savings, paying hundreds of thousands of yen to these contractors because they genuinely, desperately believe they are purchasing their child's salvation.
But in reality,
they are actively funding the psychological destruction of their child and the permanent annihilation of their family unit.
they're essentially paying an assassin to kill their relationship with their child. But the parents don't see it that way because of the misdiagnosis we talked about earlier. They equate physical location with mental health.
Exactly. The parents look into the now empty bedroom, they see the clean floor, and their Showa-era logic tells them, we did it. We fixed the problem. They are finally out of the house and in the world.
They mistake movement for progress.
They profoundly mistake the superficial physical relocation of the body for actual psychological progress.
But you haven't healed the mind. You've just orchestrated the kidnapping of the body. And where does that body go?
Into a substandard facility.
Right, run by the very grifters we described earlier, people who prioritize high profit margins over clinical care. So the individual is now trapped in a strange, likely unregulated environment, surrounded by hostile staff, completely alienated from their family, and carrying a massive new wound of betrayal.
The trauma is compounded exponentially. It is a worst-case scenario masquerading as a cure.
Which brings us to a highly practical, urgent juncture in our deep dive. We have laid out this wildly unregulated, predatory market. This is the Jinju.
This is the current reality that families in crisis are stuck navigating today.
So the vital question becomes one of self-defense. If you are a parent, if you are drowning in that existential panic and you feel you absolutely must seek outside help to save your child, how do you protect yourself?
How do you spot the fakes when the market is flooded with them?
Exactly. And the source pivots here to provide some highly crucial, actionable advice for navigating these muddy waters.
And this advice is desperately needed because, as we've noted, the predators are not operating in back alleys. They are highly sophisticated in their marketing.
They know exactly how to construct a digital facade of extreme competence, professionalism, and deep compassion.
The grift has seamlessly adapted to the algorithmic age. They understand parasocial relationships and the power of digital authority.
The source gives a truly wild, perfectly illustrative example of this modern digital facade. The author discusses observing a highly subscribed, incredibly popular YouTube channel.
Yes, that part was fascinating.
It functioned essentially as an ongoing reality show, showcasing a specific company's extraction work.
It's a fascinating, terrifying phenomenon. The monetization of the crisis through content creation.
Exactly. So you have this YouTube channel pulling in millions of views, and to the desperate parent searching for answers at 3 a.m., it looks genuinely heroic.
The videos are highly edited.
Very highly edited. They show the contractor speaking with low, gentle words, acting like a firm but loving mentor figure. They project this aura of absolute certainty.
But the author noticed something else.
Yeah, the source author notes a crucial detail. Even through the highly edited screen, an intimidating, coercive atmosphere bled through.
The author's intuition picked up on it.
Right, their intuition picked up that the gentleness was entirely performative. A very thin, fragile veneer layered over essentially aggressive bullying tactics.
And the most important takeaway from that anecdote is that the author's intuition was entirely legally validated.
What happened?
The crucial detail the source reveals is that the president of that highly subscribed, supposedly heroic company, the star of the videos, was later arrested for illegal acts related to their operations.
Wow. Which is incredibly validating for the author's radar. But it is an absolute nightmare for the thousands of desperate parents who watched those videos, built a parasocial trust with that contractor, and thought, this man is our savior.
It demonstrates terrifyingly well how easily a polished digital presence, some soft background music, and a confident tone can completely mask an abusive illegal operation.
So if a parent cannot trust the website and they cannot trust the YouTube subscriber count, how do they pierce that facade?
The source leans heavily on a deeply internal metric, what we might call the intuition test.
How does that work?
Well, when a parent finally sits down in a room with a potential contractor, there is very often a massive glaring disconnect between the literal words being spoken and the actual somatic atmosphere in the room.
The vibe, essentially.
Exactly. The contractor might be saying all the right things. We will stay close to you. We deeply understand your pain. We treat them like family. But the parent's nervous system is picking up a different signal.
Like what?
Is the atmosphere subtly coercive? Is the contractor aggressively rushing the consultation? Are they employing high-pressure sales tactics, warning that if you don't sign today, it will be too late?
The fundamental metric the source suggests is a brilliant, simple internal question the parent must ask themselves during the meeting. Do I feel safe enough to speak honestly in front of this person?
Yes. It's about psychological safety in the consultation room. If you feel intimidated, if you feel you have to perform a certain type of desperation to appease them, or crucially, if you feel dismissed, talked over, or patronized when you express legitimate doubts or ask for specifics.
That's your cue to leave.
That is your intuition screaming at you to walk away. That somatic discomfort is the most accurate data point you have.
And beyond the intuition, there are the cold, hard financial red flags.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. The source warns in the strongest possible terms against the danger of opaque pricing.
We are talking about contractors who demand hundreds of thousands of yen up front, but flat out refuse to provide a detailed, itemized breakdown of what that money actually buys.
They deflect those requests by hiding behind a mystique of proprietary knowledge. They'll say things like, our extraction methods are highly confidential, or we have secret know-how developed over decades. We can't tell you exactly what we do, but look at our success rate. Trust us, it works.
I have to pause here because this raises a really important, baffling question about human behavior.
What's that?
We are talking about grown adults here, people who have successfully navigated complex modern life, raised families, managed finances, and paid taxes for 80 years.
Right, they aren't naive.
No.
Yeah.
It is wild to think that they are handing over the cash equivalent of a down payment on a house to a complete stranger, without an itemized receipt of services, without a detailed contract, and without a clear plan.
It seems crazy from the outside.
It does. How do these contractors manipulate functional adults into just abandoning basic fundamental consumer common sense? If you were buying a used car, you would demand to see the engine, you'd check the history report. Why do they skip it here?
It's a profound question, and to answer it, we have to cycle back to the neurology of desperation we discussed at the very beginning. Desperation completely chemically blinds consumers.
The panic takes over.
Exactly. When people are locked in a state of chronic panic, their amygdala, the fear center of the brain, is firing constantly. They are terrified for their child's daily survival and their own impending mortality.
And logic just goes out the window.
When the amygdala is hijacked like that, the rational executive function of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the part that logically demands an itemized receipt, asks about cancellation policies and compares prices, literally shuts down. It goes offline.
So they aren't actually purchasing a tangible medical or psychological service at all. They're purchasing a feeling. They are buying hope.
Exactly. They're buying the alleviation of their own terror. The contractor is selling absolute certainty in an environment defined by agonizing uncertainty.
Just give me the money and the nightmare ends.
Right. When the contractor says, don't worry about the complex details, don't worry about the itemized list, just give me the money and your 30-year nightmare ends tomorrow, the parent wants to believe that so desperately that they will actively, willfully blind themselves to the glaring red flags.
Which is precisely why the source emphasizes the intuition test so strongly.
Yes. In this current landscape, tuning into that visceral gut intuition is often the only defense mechanism that still works, even when the rational brain has been hijacked by panic.
So if a parent manages to take a breath, regulate their amygdala, and hold on to their rational brain during a consultation, what are the specific self-defense necessities they need to demand before handing over a single yen?
The source is uncompromising on this. Do not proceed 1 inch without absolute written confirmation.
Like what, specifically?
You need a written, itemized cost breakdown explaining exactly where every yen is going. You need highly specific, documented details of the support that will be provided post-extraction.
Like the type of therapy.
Yes. What specific modality of therapy, how many hours a day, and the clinical credentials of the person administering it. You need a clearly documented emergency protocol.
What happens if things go wrong?
Exactly. If the child attempts self-harm at the facility or suffers a severe panic attack, what is the exact medical procedure? And crucially, you need clear, legally binding written contract cancellation terms.
So you can back out if you need to.
Right. If a contractor balks, deflects, or acts insulted when you ask for any of this basic documentation, you stand up and you walk away.
Walk away. Which brings us to the hardest, most conceptually challenging, but undeniably most important part of this entire deep dive.
The alternative.
Yes, because if we accept that outsourcing to these shady, unregulated contractors is fundamentally dangerous, and if we accept that the public system is currently inadequate to force an intervention, what is the actual alternative?
We have to conclude by exploring the source's incredibly powerful and honestly quite demanding thesis on how families must fundamentally redefine their ginjo, their current situation internally.
This is the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And it requires an immense, almost superhuman level of emotional courage and maturity from the parents. It is a complete reversal of the Showa-era script.
It really is.
I want to read a quote directly from the source here because it is incredibly radical, especially within a cultural context that leans heavily toward avoiding direct emotional confrontation and preserving public face.
Let's hear it.
The quote is, "If you love your child, look yourself first. Love that can be entirely outsourced to a stranger does not exist from the start."
Wow. That is a staggering, provocative statement. Love that can be entirely outsourced does not exist.
It's intense, right?
In one sentence, it completely dismantles the philosophical premise of the entire extraction industry.
It's an absolute gut punch to a desperate parent. It's basically telling them, you cannot buy your way out of this relationship. You cannot pay someone a premium fee to do the heavy, excruciating emotional lifting of loving your incredibly complicated, damaged child.
But the source immediately clarifies this, which is vital, because it could easily be misinterpreted as just throwing all the blame back onto the parents, which isn't clinical or helpful.
Right. They introduce the concept of redefining self-blame. In the context of actual healing, self-blame does not mean endlessly torturing yourself with guilt.
It doesn't mean weeping over past parenting mistakes, flagellating yourself, and becoming paralyzed by shame. That kind of guilt is entirely self-indulgent. It centers the parent's feelings and is completely useless to the child in crisis.
So what does productive, actionable self-blame look like in this paradigm?
It looks like taking an objective, almost clinical inventory of your own communication patterns over the past decades. It requires sitting down and asking yourself incredibly hard, uncomfortable questions.
Like, what implicit messages have my words, my tone, and my attitudes actually sent to my child over the years?
Exactly. When I thought I was offering encouragement, was my underlying tone actually dripping with criticism and disappointment? When I thought I was showing love, was I actually demanding compliance?
It is about profoundly understanding the family dynamic, not punishing yourself for it. It's the realization that a family is an interconnected ecosystem.
And you need to clearly see your own role in how that ecosystem slowly became toxic enough that your child had to retreat to their room to survive it.
Exactly. And the source stresses the absolute critical necessity of acting before the breaking point. Do not wait for the silent truce to shatter.
Do not wait for domestic violence to erupt in the hallway.
Do not wait until the tension in the house is so thick and unbearable that someone's nervous system completely snaps. Parents must proactively confront their own psychological state.
They must sit with their own anxiety, their fear of aging, their guilt, their shame about what the neighbors are whispering, before that panic clouds their judgment and leads them to dial the number of a predatory extraction contractor.
It's the classic airplane analogy, right?
Shit.
But applied to deep psychological trauma. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first.
You really do.
You have to learn how to regulate your own nervous system, manage your own panic, and process your own shame before you can even begin to be a safe presence for a child whose nervous system is entirely chronically dysregulated.
And that individual emotional regulation leads directly to reframing the entire family dynamic. The source points out that the traditional dynamic finding a cause and playing the blame game destroys the family from the inside out.
The parents blame the kid for being lazy and ruining their retirement. The kid blames the parents for being overbearing, emotionally absent, or abusive.
And while they are locked in this endless cycle, throwing blame at each other across the house, the core trauma remains completely untouched.
So what's the shift?
The paradigm shift the source demands is this. Parents and children must stop viewing each other as adversaries. They are not enemies. They are allies facing the exact same systemic problem.
They're both hurting deeply, just manifesting that pain in very different ways.
Exactly. The parent is hurting from existential fear, exhaustion, and societal shame. The child is hurting from absolute paralysis, terror of the outside world, and deep self-loathing.
But they're both trapped inside the exact same house, suffering from the fallout of the same systemic breakdown.
Yes. And the moment you successfully shift your perspective to view your child as an ally in pain rather than a stubborn adversary who's actively causing you pain, your entire definition of support radically transforms.
True support, what the source beautifully calls facing it together, does not mean the parent swoops in with a grand plan and magically solves the problem.
Because that's just falling back on the Showa-era mindset again. The arrogant idea that the parent is the supreme authority who must forcefully fix the subordinate broken child.
Exactly. True support, in this new paradigm, means standing quietly beside the child as they slowly, painfully learn to regulate their own nervous system and stand on their own. It is about providing a safe, co-regulating presence.
And the source explicitly states the incredibly difficult rules of engagement for this process.
Why?
No rushing, absolutely no comparing the child to their successful cousins or the neighbor's kids, and no forcing conclusions or setting arbitrary timelines for their recovery.
I just really want to reflect on how incredibly, almost impossibly difficult that must be for a parent to execute.
It goes against every instinct.
Your biological instinct as a parent, literally from the moment they are born, is to instantly fix their pain. They scrape their knee, you immediately put a bandage on it. They cry because they're hungry, you feed them. It is action-oriented.
Always fixing.
Right. To sit there day after day looking at your 50-year-old child who is locked in deep, chronic psychological agony and to consciously suppress the overwhelming urge to fix it immediately.
To force yourself to just sit in the extreme, agonizing discomfort of just being with them.
Yes. Without demanding they change, simply to make you feel less anxious. That requires a level of emotional maturity and nervous system control that most human beings simply do not naturally possess.
It is arguably the hardest psychological work a person can do. It requires dismantling your own ego entirely. Which brings us to the author's final, brilliantly synthesizing point about the true nature of this condition.
Oh, this part is so good.
What is so fascinating and vital here is how they completely reframe the entire phenomenon of hikikomori. Hikikomori is not a proof of weakness. It is not a moral failing. It is not a sign of a defective personality.
And crucially, for the parents who need to hear this to release their toxic shame, it is not simply a proof of a parenting failure.
So, if we strip away the Showa-era moralizing and we strip away the predatory marketing of the worry business, what actually is it?
What is it, really?
It is simply the behavioral form the human mind chooses. When a certain massive accumulation of stress, complex trauma, and relentless societal pressure finally exceeds its absolute physiological limits.
Like a breaker tripping.
Exactly. When the psychological circuit breaker trips, the entire system shuts down to prevent an electrical fire. The withdrawal, the isolation in the bedroom, is the tripped circuit breaker.
It is not a disease in itself. It is a profound, desperate, protective mechanism.
A protective mechanism. The mind is essentially saying, I can no longer process the crushing demands, the threats, and the complexities of the outside world. If I stay engaged, I will die, so I am taking the system offline to survive.
Yes. And you do not fix a tripped circuit breaker by taking a sledgehammer and smashing the fuse box to pieces.
Which is, clinically speaking, exactly what the extraction contractors do when they violently breach that room.
You fix a tripped circuit breaker by slowly, carefully identifying and removing the excessive load that caused it to trip in the first place, and then creating a safe, stable environment where the system can eventually be gently reset.
Okay, wow.
So what does this all mean? Let's pull the massive, complex threads of this deep dive together. We started by looking at a broken X-ray machine. We look at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky, dealing with profound, opaque human pain that simply doesn't have a clean, binary engineering-style solution.
And we saw exactly what happens in that Genju, that deeply flawed current reality. We saw how the 80-50 problem, the tragic intersection of an aging, terrified demographic and a deeply misunderstood psychological crisis, has birthed a highly opportunistic, predatory ecosystem.
We've learned that the worry business thrives entirely on monetizing the desperate illusion of a quick fix. We've seen how the Showa-era hangover, the toxic legacy of tough love, and the arrogant misdiagnosis of trauma as mere laziness provides the cultural justification for the violence of forced extraction.
And we've seen how that physical extraction, violently breaching a person's only safe space, achieves absolutely zero psychological healing. It only deepens the trauma and permanently incinerates familial trust.
The ultimate takeaway from the source material is stark, clear, and uncompromising. True, lasting support cannot be bought, no matter how many hundreds of thousands of yen you spend.
You cannot outsource the grueling, delicate work of relationship repair to mercenaries.
Healing requires painful, necessary internal reflection by the family unit. It requires parents regulating their own panic, fundamentally shifting from an adversarial dynamic to one of alliance, and committing to the excruciatingly slow, non-judgmental process of just standing beside someone in their pain.
And as we wrap up, I think there's a vital, much broader connection to be made here for you, the listener. Because you might be listening to this and thinking, well, I don't live in Japan. I don't have a socially withdrawn 50-year-old living in my house, and I'm not dealing with the Showa era, so this is just a fascinating, tragic, sociological curiosity.
But I promise you it's not.
No, it is highly relevant. Because at its core, this deep dive serves as a profound, universal lesson on how we, as a global modern society, handle vulnerability and psychological limits.
It is a massive, flashing warning sign against our deeply ingrained societal instinct to seek quick, expensive, consumerist fixes for incredibly complex human emotional crises.
Whenever we try to use capital to buy our way out of the messy, uncomfortable, time-consuming reality of human suffering, we inevitably create lucrative markets for predators.
Exactly. Whether it's a shady extraction contractor charging exorbitant fees in Tokyo, or a miracle diet pill promising to fix deep-seated body trauma in 30 days, or a charismatic digital guru promising instant enlightenment for a monthly subscription fee.
The mechanics of the grift and the profound human desperation that fuels it are universal.
It challenges every single one of us to ask a difficult question. When faced with someone we love who is in deep, intractable pain, or when faced with our own profound psychological limits, do we reach for the hammer of forced intervention to force a quick, aesthetically pleasing resolution?
Or do we cultivate the immense courage required to sit in the uncomfortable reality, rigorously examine our own communication and biases, and offer genuine, patient, co-regulating presence?
Which leaves us with a final, I think, very provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We've established, through the lens of the Hikikomori experience, that a period of deep, profound withdrawal is sometimes the mind's necessary protective mechanism for survival when it hits its absolute limit.
It's the circuit breaker tripping to save the house from burning down.
Right. So if that's true, if shutting down and retreating from society is literally the only way some human nervous systems can survive the crushing pressures, the bullying, the economic anxiety, and the relentless, exhausting demands of modern life.
Yeah.
What does it actually say about our society? That our first instinct, our culturally approved and heavily funded reaction, is to forcibly extract people from their safety.
To rip them out of their protective shell.
Yes, to force them right back into the exact same rigid, unsympathetic, hyperproductive systems that broke them in the first place. Are we genuinely trying to heal them, or are we just trying to make them economically useful and aesthetically convenient again so we don't have to look at the broken pieces of our own culture?
It's a question that demands we look very closely at the genjo of our own lives and ask what we value more. The genuine, complex well-being of the individual human being, or the undisturbed, frictionless functioning of the machine.
And it really is. So the next time you hear someone offering a fast, expensive, guaranteed cure for a deeply complex human problem, just remember, when the diagnostic waters are murky and the x-ray is broken, the person offering you a magic flashlight is usually just trying to blind you while they pick your pocket. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you. Take care of yourselves and each other.